How do you live in a world that owes you nothing? A world with no grand design, no cosmic purpose, no divine plan waiting to unfold? Most people run from that question. They bury it under religion, ambition, distraction, anything to avoid the terrifying silence of an indifferent universe. But one man didn't run. Albert Camus stared into the void and found something no one expected. He found freedom, not the cheap freedom of ignorance, not the comfortable freedom of denial, but something far more dangerous. A freedom that begins exactly where meaning ends. Freedom in the absurd. Born in poverty in colonial Algeria, raised without a father, Camus became the youngest Nobel laureate in literature. And his most radical idea wasn't about despair. It was about joy. A joy that most people will never understand because they're too afraid to face what comes before it. Today, we're going to walk the path Camus walked, from meaninglessness to liberation. And by the end, you might never see your life the same way again. The absurd truth. Imagine you wake up one morning and suddenly everything feels strange. The routine you've followed for years, the goals you've been chasing, the beliefs you've held, all of it feels like a script someone else wrote for you. That moment of disorientation, that crack in the surface of your comfortable life, Camus called it the absurd. But the absurd isn't chaos. It's not nihilism. It's something far more precise. The absurd is born of the confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. Think about it. You are a creature who desperately needs meaning, purpose, answers. You ask the universe why you're here, and the universe says absolutely nothing. That gap, that collision between your hunger for meaning and the world's refusal to provide it, that is the absurd. Silent. Most people feel this at some point, maybe after a loss, a failure, or a quiet night when the noise finally stops. Camus said this wasn't a problem to solve, it was a truth to face. And facing it honestly is where everything begins. But how did Camus arrive at this devastating insight? The answer lies in the soil of Algeria. Child of poverty, Albert Camus was born on November 7, 1913 in Mondovi, Algeria. His father, Lucien, was killed in the Battle of the Marne just 11 months later. Camus never knew his father. His mother, Catherine, was partially deaf and nearly illiterate. She worked as a cleaning woman. They lived in a two-room apartment in Belcourt, a working-class neighborhood in Algiers, with no electricity and no running water. Poverty, silence, hunger. There was no library in the house, no intellectual tradition, no philosophical mentor waiting in the wings. What there was sunlight. The blazing Mediterranean sun, the sea, the streets filled with life, and a school teacher named Louis Germain who recognized something extraordinary in this quiet, impoverished boy. Without my teacher, none of this would have happened. Germain fought to get Camus a scholarship. That single act of generosity changed the course of philosophy itself. If Camus's wisdom resonates with you so far, hit like and subscribe to unlock more treasures from the vault. Because what comes next shaped everything he would write. Camus never forgot where he came from. Poverty taught him that meaning wasn't handed down from above, it was forged in the dirt of real life, and that lesson would become the foundation of everything. Plague of doubt. At 17, Camus was struck by tuberculosis. In the 1930s, this was practically a death sentence. He was forced to leave school, move out of his grandmother's house, and confront something no teenager should have to face, his own mortality. But here's the paradox, that illness didn't destroy Camus, it sharpened him. Lying in bed, coughing blood, staring at ceilings, he began to think with a clarity that only comes when death sits beside you. He started writing, and what poured out wasn't self-pity, it was defiance. He refused to let suffering have the final word. His early essays, collected later as The Wrong Side and The Right Side, were raw, honest meditations on poverty, death, and beauty. He wrote about his mother's silence, the Algerian sun, the strange joy of being alive in a world that could kill you at any moment. Illness taught him what no university ever could. Life is precious because it ends. This wasn't philosophy learned from books. This was philosophy torn from lived experience. And it was this brutal education that prepared him for his greatest intellectual battle. Myth of Sisyphus. In 1942, in the middle of World War II, Camus published the book that would make him immortal, The Myth of Sisyphus. The premise is deceptively simple. Sisyphus, the figure from Greek mythology, is condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity. Every time he reaches the top, the boulder rolls back down, and he must begin again. Push, fall, repeat forever. Now, most people hear this and think it's a story about despair. But Camus saw something entirely different. He saw you. He saw me. He saw every human being who wakes up, goes to work, comes home, sleeps, and does it all again the next day. The repetition that defines most of our lives. But here's the revolutionary twist. Camus doesn't say we should escape the cycle. He doesn't say we should pretend the boulder won't roll back down. Instead, he says something that shattered the philosophical world. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Happy, not resigned, not defeated. Happy. Because in the act of pushing, in the struggle itself, Sisyphus finds something the gods never intended to give him. Purpose. And that changes everything about how we face the next challenge. Revolt as freedom. Most philosophers who faced meaninglessness arrived at one of two conclusions. Either they found God or they found despair. Camus rejected both. He called the first option philosophical suicide, the act of leaping into faith to escape the absurd, and he called the second option literal surrender. 1. Philosophical suicide, escaping into blind faith. 2. Physical suicide, surrendering to despair. 3. Revolt, embracing life despite the absurd. Camus chose the third path, revolt, but this isn't the revolt of anger or violence. It's the revolt of living fully in the face of meaninglessness. It's waking up every morning knowing that the universe doesn't care about you and choosing to care anyway. Revolt is the constant confrontation between man and his own obscurity. Think about what that means for your life. Every time you love someone knowing you could lose them. Every time you build something knowing it won't last forever. Every time you choose kindness in a world that doesn't reward it. That is revolt. Love, build, choose, revolt. Camus wasn't asking you to be happy despite suffering. He was saying that the act of living fully is the rebellion, but revolt alone wasn't enough for Camus. He needed to test this idea against the darkest moment in modern history. The Plague Years. When the Nazis occupied France in 1940, Camus didn't flee. He joined the French resistance. He became the editor of Combat, an underground newspaper that risked the lives of everyone involved. One wrong move and Camus would have been executed. But it's what he wrote during this period that reveals the depth of his philosophy. The Plague, published in 1947, is on the surface a novel about a fictional epidemic in the Algerian city of Oran. But beneath that surface, it's a meditation on how ordinary people respond to extraordinary evil. The plague in the novel isn't just a disease, it's fascism, it's suffering, it's the absurd made flesh. There are more things to admire in men than to despise. The hero of the novel, Dr. Ria, doesn't fight the plague because he believes he'll win. He fights because fighting is what gives his life meaning. Sound familiar? This is Sisyphus in wartime. This is revolt against meaninglessness when the stakes are life and death. Camus proved that his philosophy wasn't abstract theory. It was a way to live under the worst conditions imaginable. And then, something happened that would test Camus in a completely different way. Camus vs. Sartre. In the late 1940s, Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre were the two brightest stars in French philosophy. They were friends, drinking partners, intellectual allies. Paris saw them as brothers in arms. Then everything exploded. Friends, rivals, enemies. The break came over politics. Sartre believed that communism, despite its flaws, was the only path to justice. He was willing to overlook Stalin's atrocities for the greater cause. Camus was horrified. In The Rebel, published in 1951, Camus argued that any revolution that requires murder to sustain itself has already failed. No cause justifies the death of the innocent. Sartre's circle attacked The Rebel viciously. The public breakup was brutal, personal, and permanent. Betrayal. But history has been kind to Camus. The horrors of Soviet communism proved his warnings right. Camus understood something Sartre didn't. You cannot build freedom on a foundation of corpses. The absurd doesn't justify cruelty. I should like to be able to love my country and still love justice. This wasn't just a philosophical disagreement. It was a moral line Camus refused to cross. And it's a lesson that echoes louder today than ever. But Camus's greatest insight wasn't about politics. It was about something far more personal. Joy without why. Here is where most people misunderstand Camus. They think he was a pessimist, a man obsessed with death and meaninglessness, but read his actual words. In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. This is not the language of despair. This is the language of someone who has gone through the darkest night and found light on the other side. Camus loved life with a ferocity that most people never achieve. He loved swimming in the Mediterranean. He loved football. He loved women, wine, theater, friendship. And this wasn't despite his philosophy, it was because of it. When you stop demanding that life have a meaning, something miraculous happens. You start experiencing life as it actually is. The taste of coffee, the warmth of sunlight on your face, the sound of laughter. These things become extraordinary when you stop taking them for granted. The absurd doesn't rob life of beauty. it intensifies it, because when nothing is guaranteed, everything becomes a gift. Freedom is not finding meaning. Freedom is living fully without needing one. And this leads us to the most important question Camus ever asked. The first step. So how do you actually live this way? How do you take Camus's philosophy off the page and into your Monday morning? It starts with one radical act. Stop asking why. Stop asking the universe for permission to be happy. Stop waiting for a sign, a purpose, a grand revelation that will make everything make sense. Because that revelation isn't coming, and that's the best news you'll ever hear. You are free the moment you stop waiting for meaning to be given to you. Think about every dream you've postponed because you weren't sure it was your destiny. Think about every relationship you held back from because you didn't know if it was meant to be. Think about every morning you woke up feeling empty because the world didn't hand you a reason to get up. That emptiness was never a problem, it was an invitation. Camus would tell you to get up anyway, swim in the ocean, write the book, love the person, not because the universe says you should, but because you choose to. 1. Stop waiting for meaning to appear. 2. Create your own reasons to live fully. 3. Embrace the struggle as the source of joy. 4. Love without guarantees. That is the freedom Camus found, and it's waiting for you too. But there's one final truth that makes all of this urgent. Death on the road. On January 4th, 1960, Albert Camus was killed in a car accident near the town of Villebolvin, France. He was 46 years old. In his coat pocket, they found an unused train ticket. He had planned to take the train that day. Fate. The man who wrote more beautifully about the absurd than anyone in history died in the most absurd way possible. A random, meaningless accident on a country road. I do not believe in God, and I am not an atheist. But here's what matters. Camus didn't just theorize about living without meaning. He did it every single day. He lived with passion, with courage, with an honesty that terrified the intellectual establishment. He chose joy in a world that gave him every reason for despair. Passion, courage, honesty, joy. And his message is still alive, still dangerous, still liberating. The universe has no meaning, but your life does not have to be meaningless. Camus proved that freedom doesn't begin when you find the answers. It begins when you stop needing them. Albert Camus walked through poverty, illness, war, and philosophical exile, and at every turn he chose life, not because it made sense, but because choosing life in the face of meaninglessness is the most powerful act a human being can perform. Choose life always. You don't need the universe to give you permission. You don't need a cosmic purpose to justify your existence. You don't need to understand everything to live fully. The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Push the boulder, love without guarantees, create without needing applause, live without needing reasons. That is the freedom Camus found in meaninglessness, and it's yours for the taking. If you made it this far, comment "Invincible Summer" to prove you've found that freedom within yourself. The wisdom of the ages is yours. Use it well. If this unlocks something in you, subscribe for more. The vault has more wisdom waiting.